Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to my session on how does a traditional security team cope with the move to DevOps. Give you an introduction about myself. My name's Colin Domoney. I currently work for Vericode. We've got a stand downstairs. That's not why I'm here. I'm here to talk to you about my experience having built secure systems. I've got a background in embedded and communications technology. I've done medical and secure devices. My last 4 years I spent building one of the largest application security programs at an investment bank here in London. My first foray into that sort of arena. And really, this is a story not about the technology. You know, there's a lot of techie guys, there's a lot of geeks here. It's not about technology. It's about people. And it's about the lessons that we learned. And it's about some of the preconceptions and the ideas that I had coming into that program and the lessons I've learned. So we made reference to Josh Corman earlier. Elizabeth did in her talk. I've built rugged systems, and I think the thing that I've realized is that often the software that we develop lasts for much longer than we realize it's going to be in existence. It gets attacked by people far more skilled than the people that wrote the software. That's certainly the experience in my history, in my time at my investment bank job. Now, there's a lot of cinema references in my talk. There's a t-shirt to anybody who can get all of them. The storyboard for today's discussion is how I built a security team. I came into a role without any team. I was the guy who built the team. I had some preconceived ideas of what that team would look like. What it ended up looking like was quite a lot different to what you might have expected. There's a good story on how not to do development and operations. There's the difference between the developers and security, that dialogue, how they get things wrong, the kind of discussions that I saw happening, the kind of messaging that I was seeing as security people going to our developers and where it all broke down. We did things a little bit differently, and that was to some extent got lucky, born out of ignorance. We approached things differently. I'm just going to talk about some of the differences and what we found there. So when I started the program, I was the security guy in the organization, and that's what I thought I needed. Right? I thought I needed a hacker. I thought I needed somebody who wrote code, who could hack. That's the type of person that I wanted to build up my security program. So I went to human resources and I said, right, I need some AppSec people, and they brought me guys like this, right? Smart suits, ties, a whole load of certifications, nothing wrong with that. I'm sure we've all got a couple of those, but not really what I was looking for in the environment. So what I ended up getting through circumstances was a bunch of these guys. So I got a bunch of kids who knew very little about AppSec. They had no preconceived ideas. They were open to learn. They were malleable. You could shape their thinking. You could build a process around them. And that is really their story that I'm going to share with you. So sticking to that cinematic references, I'm going to give you a horror story. Right? This is a bit of a disaster. It's set here in London, in England. It's Friday. It's coming up to 6 o'clock. You're just getting ready to go home. So let's meet the hero of our story. Right? That's our developer, bright-eyed, enthusiastic. They've got their new business application. They're going to roll out a new trading platform. They're using all the coolest technology. They're rocking Mustache.js, Eyebrow.js, whatever. They've got it. If it's brand new, they've got the new technology stacks. They're trying to do a release. It's Friday afternoon. They're doing a release. Let's have a look. Every film needs to have a sheriff, right? That's your sheriff. That's your operations guy. Who's an operations background here? You just be careful. All right, there's more of you than of me. So, our operations in an investment bank. Gavin, I know you're from an investment bank. How many other guys here from banking organizations? So, operations guys, a sheriff is a pretty good character. They might be running old, antiquated systems. They rule the turf. It's their domain. That's your sheriff. Now, who's the bad guy? Who's the villain in this? The monster, the security team, right? I mean, this is an evil guy. It's a horrendous creature. It's like a cross between Freddy Krueger and Frankenstein's monster. Let's have a look at him. Now, of course, it's me. I was the security guy, right? So I was the guy who got to do that, right? So when our poor developer was doing a development stage, he'd done his UAT and sitting, he was trying to deploy into production. I was the guy who got to say, stop, you're not doing that. You failed some environmental control on your hardware. The developer, it's 20 to 6 on a Friday evening. He doesn't know his oxide from his elbow. He doesn't know what the operations people are talking about. He doesn't understand their language. So that was the breakdown that we used to see. So we'd put a hard gate in at production. We thought that would drive the right behavior. We thought, well, if we stop people doing bad things and going into production, that'll encourage the right behavior. What we ended up seeing, of course, is that people simply stayed on the left as far as they could. They did all their work, they did all their development in development, and only at the final point that they needed to go to production did they try and roll out to production. That meant that people were developing on platforms that weren't production ready, weren't hardened. It drove entirely the wrong sort of behavior. So that's like a textbook case of how not to do it. If I could describe this kind of process, the typical thing that you see in an organization like this, an organization that is a long way from being DevOps ready or DevOps capable. I'm happy to chat to people afterwards about the views on that. I think large banks, they've still got a long way to go. If I could sum up that in one word, I'd say it's reactive. Right, the kind of language you heard from people was it's non-compliant, it's not meeting policy, it's been blocked, you need an exception from senior management, you need a risk acceptance, there's a deadline, you need to do a risk assessment. All good and well, none of these things are actually helping improve your security position. What we did differently is we tried to be proactive, and I'm going to give you some specific examples that Marcus talked about, some of the tooling. I'm with a tool vendor. Some of the specific examples of things that we did around with the technology and how we used that technology. So proactive, you can see it change in the language, right? Let's discuss a remediation plan. Here's a wiki page on how to deal with that. Identifying components, going to people and saying, you're using a vulnerable component. Here's a code sample that shows you how to fix that. There's a new version of that library. You need to do a new scan, or ideally, you fixed all your flaws. I could also say that we're probably pragmatic in how we approach things. Elizabeth made the reference this morning. You don't have to fix everything. It's not green or red, right? You're making things safer. Anything that you do, you're making an improvement. When we started with this, I think in the first couple of years of scanning, we surfaced somewhere around, hundreds of thousands of what you'd call high severity flaws. Where do you start with that? Right, so you have to start somewhere. In my role at Veracode, I actually deal with a lot of organizations. I'm an evangelist. I go out and talk to other customers facing the same kind of problems that we'd had, and a lot of people don't know where to start. Yeah, it doesn't actually matter where you start as long as you start somewhere. You'll make up a plan as you go along. And people talk to me, what was our 5-year strategy? What was our vision? Sort of didn't have one. We made it up as we went along. As long as you're doing something along the way, then you're on the right path. Checkbox compliance, right? So a big bank, compliance-driven organization, it was full of that. The gating process that I talked about, there were, I don't know how many checkpoints, but somebody had gone through all these checkpoints and ticked them all off. The application was no more secure than if they'd simply thrown that checkbox in the bin. Be pragmatic, negotiate with your development teams. If you tell them they've got to achieve 100% flaw reduction, they're just simply not going to start. Don't set the bar so high that they will simply write that off as another checkbox exercise that they have to go through. Give them realistic goals, right? Be pragmatic on how you prioritize your flaws. You don't need to fix everything. Prioritize what you're going to remediate. And end goal is risk reduction and not compliance. So a couple of specifics, maybe going into a little bit of the technology on what we did. Being able to communicate with the developers, understand their release cycles, their environments, their challenges. So a lot of this is cultural. So in a big organization like that, you've got teams, you have to understand what pressures those teams are under. There's language and communication barriers. Make sure that you get people that are patient and that are willing to learn and willing to understand. One of the things that we identified immediately is on having a lot of flaw review and remediation calls with people, we started to see anti-patterns. So we started seeing people doing the same thing, right? You inherit that the badness, right? Lots of reuse of the same bad coding patterns. So what we did is I'd started to identify that and started to build up a library and a knowledge base of where we were seeing these common anti-patterns, the systematic things that people were doing wrong. So then built e-learning around that, built instructor-led training around that. Remediation guidance and code snippets. So we ran a pretty big remediation program. We actually got consultants in-house and actually dedicated those consultants to the application teams. So we had the assumption that if we simply highlighted the flaws, told people what to do, gave them e-learning resources, and incentivized them / forced them to go and remediate, they would just, of their own volition, go and do that. I was surprised and quite shocked, really, that a lot of the cases, the developers actually don't know what to do. You can give them OWASP articles. You can give them, you have to have that hands-on. You have to have somebody, a security consultant who's actually dedicated and is sitting with that team and almost takes ownership with that development team. So that would be one of my key takeaways as one of the things that we probably did differently and I think really worked really well. Other things we started seeing was code reuse, right? So from copy-paste, bad examples, but we saw standard libraries. And the typical discussion that we'd have with the development team would be, we've seen that you've used this piece of code, there's a flaw in it, and the team would accept that, and then they would say, yeah, but that's not our code. So they'd want to mitigate. And what we did is then went out and tried to identify who owned that code. So to understand where that ownership lay within our organization and then shift the problem up the sort of supply chain, as it were, and get that application team to take ownership of that, and then put that back into the knowledge base and then drive that down so that the next time we got on a call and had that same discussion, we already had a pre-cooked solution and we knew how to deal with that. The code reuse, open source, and COTS software libraries, I would say typically our organization, probably 2/3 of our flaws are found in open source and commercial packages. What we did is we were very proactive. I said the word proactive. It's one of the bigger programs that we run using, in this case, Veracode, but there's a number of package tools that can go and analyze what your software composition looks like. A lot of times organizations simply don't know what they're using. Developers don't know what they're using. Certainly the organization doesn't know what they're using. They very definitely don't know what their license usage looks like, and you can be rest assured they don't know what vulnerabilities they're exposing themselves to. What we did in that case was we had a issue with, there was a Struts2 remote execution vulnerability a couple of years ago. We went and proactively, and this is coming back to that keyword, being proactive about this, going and having a look at what other applications in the organization use that same package, and then being able to go to them and say, we think you might have a problem. And if you think about that security gate process that we had earlier, that would have flown through that because it simply wouldn't have been a gate. They would have been running ArcSight or whatever it was. They were great. They would have passed that gate, but actually they were deploying live with a broken Struts2 package. So that was a good example of how we were proactive, got ahead of the game on that. Pragmatic approach to remediation. Yeah, people need to fix their code. As I said, they don't have to fix everything. We developed a systematic way for developers to review their findings and then to be able to evidence and document why they felt that a particular flaw or issue, false positives on static analysis, how they thought they were going to mitigate that, right? So we forced them down a route. We didn't allow them to be too creative in how they wanted to propose mitigations. We made them think. That was the key thing. We got them to think about what this issue was. It might be a false positive in the tool. It might be something that's not exploitable in the real world. They might have environmental controls. But the point was we made them think about what they were going to write down. That we didn't let them just say, it's a false positive, the tool is broken. It was fine. It didn't matter if the tool had a false positive, but we identified something and then made them think about that. We made that systematic. We drummed it into them. We taught them so that the fact that now developers, it's second nature for them to understand how to propose these mitigations in this format, which then makes it really easy for the security guy, the bad guy, to come along and say yes, no, that stands to reason, and then use new technology when relevant. We had applications where we simply had vulnerability counts that were prohibitive to remediate. Right, applications that weren't currently in investment. It didn't make economic sense to invest money in remediating. Does that mean there's no risk? Of course not. So use new technologies. We're using runtime protection. I think there's a talk this afternoon by Munio. It's an interesting place to be looking at in terms of protecting. There's particular use cases for it. I think in an investment bank, in a big bank, where you've got legacy applications, there's some really, really nice use cases. Use the new technology when it's relevant. So looking to the future, yeah, I'm optimistic about things in what we've done. I'm surprised how long it's taken to do what we've done. I mean, the stats on the program. It was something like 1,000 applications were brought under application security. We fixed hundreds of thousands of flaws, highs and very highs. I'm optimistic about what can be achieved. I think if we carry on doing things the way we've been doing them with a gating process like that, with the type of language that we're using, that traditional security people are using, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. I think people need to take a fresh approach to how your security professionals are dealing with your developers. Yeah, change that language. Be proactive. Come to them with solutions for the problems. Ideally, you even do that before they know that they have problems. And there's cases now where the consultants are reaching out to people and saying, "Do you know that you're using a package that's internally developed, has got issues, and by the way, here's a new version." How many times we've been able to go to developers and say, "We've seen you using an open source component, that one's out of date, you've got a migration path to this is the approved library." So I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I think if we help developers help themselves, and particularly if we change the language, I think we're on the way to a happy place. I think that's all I have in terms of presentation. I'd really welcome questions either now or if you want to come downstairs, chat to me on the stand. I haven't talked about any of the technologies. One of the things I'm doing at Veracode is new tech, because I'm interested in, because I've seen the problem at first hand. I've seen how the scale of the problem, coming from a background where I was probably working in smaller teams on embedded or high-grade systems, I wasn't aware of how big a problem application security is. I remember when I went for the job interview, I Googled OWASP. I didn't know what OWASP was 4 years ago. Yeah, amazed that the scale of that problem exists, and how difficult a problem that is for people to solve. New technologies, so where you can't remediate, you don't have the money, use the tools, use the technology. There's some great tools and technologies out there. Use them to do what you can do in the meantime, but make sure that you're actually addressing that problem at root and going back to your developers. If you've got the kind of security problems and the kind of coding issues that I've seen, you've probably got some other serious problems in your application estate and your business logic that you really need to be addressing. Spend your effort, spend your time there, not on fixing all your cross-site scripting and SQL. Use the tool to automate and simply surface those as quickly as possible. So that's all I've got. Really hope there are a couple of questions.